As I walked into our bedroom and saw my wife lying in bed with another man, my heart sank. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My wife had been cheating on me. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, all at once. But as the days went by, I started to uncover the extent of her infidelity and realized just how much she had been lying to me. This is the story of how I found out about my wife's affair and the shocking aftermath that ensued. It began, as it turned out, long ago, but I witnessed the culmination last year. It was then that one of my wife's close friends, Rebekka, sort of came over for a visit as usual. And she asked me not to go into the next room, which is what I usually do, to give the girls a chance to talk about their lady parts. She asked me to stay in the room to get some advice or anything else I might be able to help with. The request seemed to me a little strange, but at the same time very important. Amy and David have a decent, well-to-do family. For as long as we have known them, they have always been almost the model of a good couple. And their son Harvey also gave the impression of being a decent guy. Not once has Amy ever complained to Rebekka about any family or personal problems. That's why I was very surprised that usually smiling Amy was sitting opposite us and drinking tea in silence, getting ready for a serious and, evidently, hard for her conversation. Now let's start by going back almost 2 years. February 2021. Evening. In the kitchen, me, Rebekka, and Amy, who, after a hot cup of tea drunk in silence, began her story. I thought all our family woes started recently when we took David's mom in. But, as luck would have it, it started much earlier. At first I thought keeping big secrets was hard. Then somehow I got used to the idea that no one would ever know anything, and lo and behold. David was a motocross racer when he was young. Well, he competed on his motorcycle. That was before we were married. And then I thought that when we got married, he would give up this dangerous occupation. But it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. It was over a year since we became a family, and he was still gone all day with his motorcycle. I was living with his mother at the time. Monica Smith took me in as her daughter, so there were no problems living together. Monica Smith had a 2-bedroom apartment, so we were all comfortable. David's father died a long time ago, so that's how the 3 of us lived. And then something happened that divided our lives into BFOR and AFTR. The call from the hospital. David was injured, badly. He was only 26 at the time. Monica Smith and I spent the first few days in the hospital, but they wouldn't let us see him. And then David came to his senses. The doctors told him directly that he might be able to get up someday from the wheelchair, but that he would not be able to have children. They said so right in front of us. David was gritting his teeth, and then he started screaming that he'd rather die than live like that. I was so scared when he started pounding on the mattress of the bed with his fists. Monica Smith always gave the impression of a strong-willed woman. She was confused only for a moment, and then she came up to her son, held him close, and said, "Don't make God angry, son, by bringing death on yourself. You don't know anything, so you don't have to say things like that. Amy is pregnant, and you are getting on her nerves. Calm down. You have a child. You just have to wait until it is born. So calm down, calm down." I opened my mouth in surprise and shock, but did not have time to say anything. Monica Smith turned to me and said menacingly, "You have no business being pregnant to watch hysterics. Go into the hallway. I'll be with you in a minute." I went out into the corridor, and I was shocked and horrified. I know I'm not pregnant. So I think, why did my mother-in-law lie? Maybe to calm her down. What's there to reassure her? There's no pregnancy and nowhere to get pregnant. How do you tell David afterwards? To tell David that I'd lost the baby would be a double trauma to him, and it was a sin. But before I could put my mind to it, Monica Smith came out of the room and literally rushed over to me. "Don't ruin it, daughter. I pray to God, don't ruin it." My mother-in-law took me by the hand, she said. I have one son, you see, one son. I cannot lose him. He may be crippled, he may not walk, but he is alive. Let him think that the child is in your belly. Let him. And then what? Quite seriously interrogated me. Shall we say that you lost it? Then David will definitely kill himself. Wait. My mother-in-law said very seriously, looking me straight in the eye. We'll talk at home. Don't argue with me. You have a child for David, and that's it. Understand? I just shook my head in response. I wanted David to calm down too, so he wouldn't think about getting his hands on himself. That day when I returned to the ward, he apologized for his nervous breakdown, kissed my hands, congratulated me, and just revived. All the talk was about my pregnancy. If I had known then. That evening, my mother-in-law called me into the kitchen. We had a serious and very unpleasant conversation. Alenka, we need to talk. And we have to have a very serious talk. My mother-in-law started. Sit down, sit down. Tell me, Amy, did you have someone before David? What are you talking about, Monica Smith? How could you think that? David was my first and only. I started answering honestly right away. Wait, don't get mad. That's not what I'm asking. It's up to you who's the only one. In a calm and serious tone, continued Monica Smith. Were you courted by anyone? Did you ever go out with anyone before David? I had. I was relieved to answer, not expecting a catch. In the department where I work now, there was one. Trying to win my affections. That was before David. But we didn't even go out. I made it clear to him that. So what? He stopped trying to win my affections. My mother-in-law interrupted me with a question. Not really. I answered honestly, but a little embarrassed. But you do not think we had nothing like that. It was all him. He tried to give flowers, to take me home. But I am a married woman. I do not. When was the last time he paid any attention to me? My mother-in-law asked even more forcefully. It was a while ago, I think. I try not to pay attention. It was as if I was making excuses, trying to remember the last time a young graduate student from Jake had paid attention to me. Here's the thing, Amy. My mother-in-law interrupted me. Listen to me and don't argue. You and I are going on a mission to save David and me. Here's what we're going to do. Believe me, I still don't understand how Monica Smith managed to talk me into this scam. Yes, it was a scam. That's the only way I can think of to call it. She arranged for us to have a date with Jake at our house. You know what kind of date we're talking about. Anyway, my mother-in-law told me that it didn't matter who the baby would be from. All that matters is what it is, and David will get the meaning of life. She said that no one would know this secret but us. She said that she would have to get Jake drunk so he wouldn't remember anything, and then tell him it never happened. She said my job was to get pregnant, and she'd take care of the rest. Believe it or not, I never felt nastier before or after. The only consolation was that my mother-in-law convinced me it was for a good cause. I even prayed that it would work the first time, and I wouldn't have to, you know. Anyway, that's about how my mother-in-law expected it to go. Jake got drunk quickly. Everything happened. I sent him home in a cab. In the morning at the institute, I told him that everything was a mistake and nothing happened, because Jake was drunk as a pig. He believed it. He was even embarrassed, and he tried not to show his face to me after that. Monica Smith slept with a neighbor that night. She came in early in the morning to see if I had done her bidding. When she was sure that everything had happened, she waited, just like me, waiting to see if it had worked out. Well, to my surprise and my mother-in-law's and I's joy, everything really worked out. And then David started asking me when to expect a son or daughter. And what should I say? My mother-in-law and I always went to visit him together. She smoothed out all the questions/answers, and after another question from David, she said to my forehead, Actually, David, it's not appropriate for Amy to go to hospitals pregnant. I'm checking up on you, and that's fine. Let her take care of the baby and stay home. Or take an extra walk in the park than with all those sick people. David tried to object at the time, but his mother had always had an influence on him. So we decided that I would not see David for the time being, and he would not see me. So that he would not see my belly, and he would not be able to calculate the terms, and he would not ask unnecessary questions. Monica Smith kept asking me about the last and penultimate time David and I had a baby. She was calculating dates. As she said, she was calculating the correct date of birth for her grandson or granddaughter. My mother-in-law got involved not only in calculating the date of birth, but David as well. From one hospital to another, then rehabilitation, sanatoriums. She scheduled his treatment for a year in advance, so that he would not even be at home. And then, when I was almost 8 months pregnant, she told me, "Remember, Amy, tomorrow is your baby's birthday. You give birth when you give birth, and the papers say tomorrow. Got it? I'll make David happy, and no one will ever know our secret. Got it?" And the very next day, my mother-in-law sent me to the village where she was born. It wasn't very far from the city, but it was out of sight. That's where I finished my pregnancy, and there I gave birth. No matter what Monica did, the date on the birth certificate was the one she calculated. I almost had David on his feet. Again, so there would be no questions, Harvey told me to stay in the country until a year. And David, who had already returned home, said that it was not good for the baby to be here with the father, who had not fully stood on his feet. That's how we lived. When Harvey was 1 year old, well, 1 year according to the documents, we came home from the village, to Monica. David walked by himself, but with a cane. As the doctor said, he still has a limp, but he walks on his own. So we began to live as a happy family. David couldn't be happy about his son and everything was going well with us. My mother-in-law never mentioned our secret, but I couldn't stop thinking about it at first, and then I forgot everything and completely forgot it. We got our own apartment and moved out from my mother-in-law's place. Harvey grew up long ago, had a family of his own. He also lived separately, but in a rented apartment for now, not far from us. That's why they often came to visit. And then Monica became very bad. Old age, in her case, is not a good thing. It's like a little early, but dementia has started, such that it became dangerous to leave her mother-in-law alone. She confuses me with Milana, my son's wife. Then she does not recognize Harvey, then she talks to herself. So we took her with David to her place. And that would have been fine, except it hadn't been 2 months since my mother-in-law had come to live with us. And then Harvey comes in with Milana. We're expecting a grandchild. Milana's tummy's starting to show. But before I could rejoice, Monica was literally hysterical. She confused me with Milana again and attacked my daughter-in-law. She started screaming, "It's not your baby, David, not yours. I know who she's going to give birth to and with whom she's horned you." David calmed her down, took her to her room, and it was put down to dementia. But then we had our grandson, Hank. So my son and daughter-in-law came to visit with our grandson. Monica seemed to get better. She hadn't had much of a breakdown until that day. But when she saw Milana with her son in her arms, she started to say, I know who gave birth to her son." She arranged a date with him herself and bought wine and cognac. In general, let's tell more details of that evening. David took her into the bedroom again, but something had changed. David was not himself. He tried to talk to me. Like, where would my mom get such details and all on the same subject? I just shrugged it off and said I was old. But, as it turned out, my David decided to take it a step further. He had his doubts about his grandson, for crying out loud. And he didn't talk to me about it, he just kept it to himself. Every corner and every TV channel, he's always talking about the DNA and the unborn children. You know what he did on the sly? He took a DNA test to find out if he and his grandson were related. And the result is 0. And how can it be related if Harvey is not his son? And I come home from the market and there's a row and a yell at home. Harvey and David were almost fighting. I tried to intervene, but I almost got caught in the heat of the moment. So I stood there and tried to understand why there was screaming in our house when there was no screaming at all. And then I understood from the conversation that David called his son to talk and provided a document saying that Hank was not your son because he was not my grandson. Your Milana had a baby and you, son, are a cuckold. Here, without expecting myself, I slammed my hand on the door and how I screamed, either out of horror or to calm them down. I never understood why. But I knew one thing. Not to spoil my son's life, I must confess. There was no other way out. I was telling them the whole story about my betrayal, about how Monica and I had been hiding it all these years, and so on. I cried, of course, even repented. David threw himself at my feet. Only my husband and son were almost indifferent. I wish I could take my mother-in-law as a witness, to tell her that it was not my idea and why we did it. But how could I take her as a witness when she was not in her right mind? As soon as I finished my confession, I thought it would make me feel better. But it didn't. David and Harvey looked at each other like strangers, silent at first. Then Harvey asked when his real birthday was and who his real father was. David said he was going to stay at his mom's apartment and wear whatever he was wearing, and then he left. That's where Amy ended her story last year. Rebekka and I listened to her without interrupting. I kept trying to figure out what kind of help Olga was expecting from us. But she was quiet for a while, and then she voiced her request. Richard, would you meet David mine? Huh. Just like that, for no reason at all. Just find out what's going on, please. What's his mood, and how he is in general. He's not answering his phone. When I went to see him, I heard he was home, but he didn't open the door. I will try, but I can't promise anything, I answered. David and I never got to meet. He must have realized what Amy had asked me to do, or maybe he just didn't want to see anybody. David had never forgiven her for betraying him. For good, but betrayal nonetheless. Oh, I don't even know if some people should know the truth after all these years or not. What do you think?